Indeed, all praise is due to Allah. We praise Him, seek His help, and ask for His forgiveness. We seek refuge with Allah from the evil of our own souls and from our bad deeds. Whomever Allah guides, no one can lead astray, and whomever He allows to go astray, no one can guide. I bear witness that there is no deity worthy of worship except Allah, alone without any partners. And I bear witness that Muhammad is His servant and messenger. May the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him and his family. As for what follows, the most truthful speech is the Book of Allah, and the best guidance is the guidance of Muhammad. May the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him and his family. The worst of matters are those that are newly invented, and every innovation is a misguidance, and every misguidance leads to the fire. As for what follows, in the context of responding to atheists by the help and strength of the Lord of the worlds, mention of some introductions preceded the detailed response. And the truth is that these introductions are both introductions and results at the same time. But it's okay. And this is an introduction from these introductions. In The Story of Faith, an explanation of the difference between perception and rationality. Creation from nothing is not logically impossible. Even if the atheist finds it impossible, rejects it, and is unable to conceive it. But our minds in the realm of large numbers rely on imagining clear facts. And these clear facts only require a little contemplation and simple arithmetic, such as addition, and the minds are very strange at that moment, to the point that they doubt the result, even if the most honest and knowledgeable people inform them of that result. Don't you know the puzzle of the cut paper? If you were given a very thin piece of paper, its thickness is 1 part out of 100 parts of a millimeter, and you were asked to cut it in half. Then cut the halves again to make them 4. Then cut the 4 to make them 8, and so on until you repeat the cutting and doubling 48 times. If you were asked before starting the cutting and before calculating, how thick do you expect this thin paper to be after cutting it 48 times? No matter how much you exaggerate in estimation, you would not say its thickness exceeds 1 meter, or 2 meters, or 3. When someone tells you that if you repeat cutting a piece into 48 times and then stack the cut pieces on top of each other reaching the sky, almost touching the moon, which is 384,000 kilometers away from the earth, you would be amazed at first. But when you calculate it yourself, you will find your mind incapable of comprehending it. Take your pen and calculate. A very thin sheet with a thickness of 1 part in 100 million meters, cut in half, then cut the halves again to make 4, then cut the 4 to make 8, and so on until you repeat the cutting and doubling 48 times. If you stack this up to the sky, it would almost touch, or actually touch, the moon, depending on the distance between you and the moon, which is 384,000 kilometers. Try this calculation for yourself, and may God help you. The mind accepts and confirms it, without doubt, but the imagination struggles with it. Therefore, there is a difference between understanding and imagining. A person may understand something, but struggle to imagine it at the same time. The thickness of this cut sheet is close to 384,300 kilometers, almost touching the moon as mentioned. But can you imagine this result after creating it with your own hands? This is the sports result that the mind acknowledges, and no one can deny it. It cannot be accepted by imagination, for even after acknowledging it intellectually, you still feel a mental completeness about imagining it. Do you now realize that our minds sometimes refrain from imagining many facts that logical reasoning confirms their validity? That is because our minds are created incapable of imagining many things. However, they can judge their existence through conclusive logical reasoning. Imagination is not the same as rationality. The sun that you see, the mind affirms based on precise calculations that it is 1,000,000 times larger than the earth. Yet you see it in the sky in this way, and your mind refrains from imagining that it is more than 1,000,000 times larger than this earth when it appears weakened. Therefore, imagination is not the same as rationality. You may be able to rationalize something but not be able to imagine it, because rationality relies on primary intuitions that the mind takes in arranging and composing them, deducing some from others, and building some upon others, leading to a conclusive rational judgment that the mind itself may not be able to imagine, but has reached. Modern science today acknowledges this fact that was previously mentioned about the difference between the possibility of imagining something and the ability to rationalize it. The modern science does not care about the mind's inability to imagine, but relies solely on rationality, because scientific facts have surpassed imagination in their fields, quantities, and numbers, and because they calculate, know, and judge them through rationality, not through imagination. Take, for example, light waves. Do you think that the scientists who calculated that the waves that occur, causing the color purple to appear, happen at a speed of 60,000 waves per inch, are the ones who came up with that calculation, thus determining that fact that is indisputable? But can those scientists who have determined that fact imagine this speed if they blindfold their eyes and exhaust their imagination? No, because this huge number in this tiny space is beyond the mind's ability to imagine, but it is not beyond its comprehension. That is, the ability to judge its correctness through reason. In modern atomic research, numbers can reach such a huge magnitude that the mind is unable to conceive them, as I will show you. Take, for example, scientists estimate that the speed of sound waves can reach 500,000 vibrations per second, and this is a proven scientific fact that they have no doubt about intellectually. But can they imagine the occurrence of this huge number of vibrations in 1 second? Try it yourself. Can you imagine, no matter how hard you try, 1,000 vibrations per second? Not to mention 100,000? Not to mention 500,000 vibrations per second? But this thing that you and the scientists are unable to imagine is a reality without a doubt. How did they come to know it? They knew it through rational calculation. But now we understand that imagination is different from comprehension, and that the key is the mind's ability to comprehend, not its inability to imagine. This is the meaning of the scientist saying, "Creation from nothing can be comprehended, even if humans exclude it, or doubt it, or are unable to imagine it. This is the purpose of the puzzle of the cut piece of paper and the examples that followed it." In order for a person to reach this mental conviction that he distinguishes between conception and rationalization, to ultimately conclude that creation from nothingness can be rationalized, but the human mind, despite proving itself as rational, may fail to conceive it. Thus, those who say, "We can prove rationally, and reason does not deny that this universe existed from nothingness," they say, "This can be rationalized, but we cannot conceive it." We say, "Your conception is of no consequence to us. We do not consider it, nor do we pay attention to it, for the truth that has been mentioned, that the mind proves many things that it rationalizes, and at the same time fails to conceive them." This is an introduction, followed by this introduction with the help of the Lord of the earth and the heavens. And it is in the categories of knowledge, the studies that scientists speak of, theology, prophethood, and audition. They include many judgments regarding existence, possibility, and impossibility, such as our saying, for example, that the existence of God is necessary, and that the existence of a partner to Him is an impossible matter, and our saying that His actions are permissible for every possible thing and leaving it. Therefore, it is necessary When we encounter this issue that we are about to address with the help and strength of Allah, to know these judgments, necessity, possibility, and impossibility, to know what is necessary in itself, what is possible, what is impossible. Known matters are divided into impossible, necessary, and possible. These are the categories of knowledge. The known is divided into three categories: the impossible, the necessary, and the possible. All matters that we know, or that our knowledge can be related to, are divided in terms of their existence into three categories. The first, the impossibility of its existence in itself. The second, the necessity of its existence in itself. The third, the possibility of its existence in itself. As for the definition of the impossibility in itself and its example, the impossibility in itself is what its non-existence in itself implies. That is, what its essence necessitates non-existence in a way that cannot be proven at all, when looked at without considering anything external to it. An example of this is the meeting of opposites, such as existence and non-existence, or motion and stillness in the same thing at the same time, which is impossible. The meeting of opposites is impossible in itself, as something cannot be both existent and non-existent, or moving and still at the same time. Similarly, an example of the impossibility in itself is the existence of a partner to God. All these matters are judged by reason to be impossible in their essence instinctively, or through evidence when looked at in themselves. This is the definition of the impossibility in itself, and an example of it. As for the necessity in itself and its example, the necessity in itself is what its existence in itself implies. The impossibility in itself is what its non-existence in itself implies. The necessity in itself is what its existence in itself implies. That is, what its essence necessitates existence in a way that cannot be non-existent at all, when looked at without considering anything external to it. An example of this is the existence of God, and one example is the filling of a void by a body. The filling of a void by a body is a necessity in itself. Therefore, a body must occupy a certain amount of space, and so is the proof of the evenness of the number 4. 4, for example. We judge the necessity of occupying any body of the bodies with a certain amount of emptiness, no matter how small, in which its existence is realized. Otherwise, it would not be a body that exists. Likewise, we judge the necessity of the number 4 being an even number, not odd, just by conceiving it. Otherwise, it would be the same as that number, but it would be either 3 or 5 or other odd numbers. But it is necessary to prove its evenness. Examples of necessity in itself: the Father's precedence over His Son in existence, and the whole being greater than the part. These are matters that the mind judges to exist and to be necessary instinctively, or by evidence just by looking at them in themselves. As for the possible in itself and its example, the possible in itself is what has neither existence nor non-existence in itself. That is, what does not necessitate its own existence or non-existence. And that is when we look at it without considering anything external to it, if it is found, because something else has given it existence, because its existence is not from itself, and it is equal in its right to existence and non-existence. So if it is found, then there must be a cause for it, and if it is found and then non-existent, then there must be someone who made it non-existent. If it is also non-existent, then there is a reason for its existence, and if it is found, then something else has given it existence. An example of this: all the creatures that we see in front of us, such as animals, plants, and inanimate objects, and all their conditions, such as the descent of rain, the blowing of the wind, and other similar matters that occur in this world. All of them are possible and need a cause for their existence. Because they are equal in their right to existence and non-existence, they exist after non-existence, and then non-existence follows their existence. So their existence is not necessary like the existence of the necessary. Otherwise, they would not cease to exist, because the necessary does not cease to exist. And their non-existence is not necessary like the impossibility of existing, because the impossible does not exist. But an unclear word, and this is the meaning of its possibility. This introduction is very important, and you will find it, God willing, in the explanation of the scholar Ibn Uthaymeen on Al-Safariniyya, in his latest explanation on Al-Safariniyya. So he came with these sections, which are the known sections, and distinguished between the obligatory for itself and the obligatory for others, and the impossible for itself and the impossible for others, as mentioned in the explanation of the scholar Ibn Uthaymeen on Al-Safariniyya. The possible for itself may become obligatory for others if its existence is necessary. As if Allah wanted the existence of a human being, then his existence becomes obligatory for himself, not obligatory for himself, rather obligatory for others, and it is related to the will of Allah. Because as long as he wanted his existence, it must exist, but it is possible in reality. Because it was equal in its right to existence and non-existence, it was non-existent, so when Allah wanted the existence, therefore, it passed in the definition of the obligatory, that its existence for itself, so it is not counted from it. What becomes obligatory for others, because the obligatory for others, as mentioned in the example, is among the possibilities. Likewise, the possible may become impossible, but not for itself, but it becomes impossible for others if its non-existence is necessary. As if Allah wanted the non-existence of a certain human being, then his existence becomes impossible, not for himself, because he himself is non-existent, but for others, and it is related to the will of Allah in his non-existence, so it becomes impossible for others, not impossible for itself. Because this is related to the will of Allah, when Allah Almighty will. Therefore, it accepts both existence and non-existence, so it cannot be impossible. Because the impossible does not accept existence at all, just as the necessary by itself does not accept non-existence at all. That is why it is mentioned in the definition of the impossible, that its non-existence by itself, so that it is not considered impossible for something else, because the impossible for something else is among the possibilities. If we consider the impossible as a known matter, because we started by mentioning the categories of the known, we said, the necessary by itself, the possible by itself, and the impossible by itself. In fact, as mentioned, the categories of the known began by mentioning the impossible by itself at the beginning. If we consider the impossible as a known matter, then it is not in reality, but figuratively, because every mental image must be a corresponding image to something existing outside. And since the impossible does not exist at all, it cannot have a mental image, nor can it be considered a known fact, but rather what is meant by considering it as a known matter, and that it is among the categories of the known. The mind imposes an example for it, to conclude by this assumption that it is judged as impossible, because you cannot imagine in the known matters that something is both existent and non-existent at the same time, or that it is moving and stationary at the same time. This does not exist, because the mind imposes an example for it, to conclude by this assumption that it is judged as impossible. Therefore, the mind cannot conceive a moving and stationary machine together, because such a thing does not exist in reality, but it imposes the combination of movement and stillness in a specific machine to judge it as impossible. The judgment of the impossible, that it does not accept existence at all, for the impossible does not accept existence at all. Rather, it is necessarily non-existent. So the combination of movement and stillness in one thing or at one time never exists. And so, the son surpassing his father in existence never happens. The evidence for this is that non-existence is necessary for its essence and nature. It never leaves it, because we have known it, as it has passed, that its non-existence, for its essence, meaning its essence, always requires non-existence. Therefore, the impossible never accepts existence. And if non-existence is necessary among the necessities of the impossible, then if the impossible were to be assumed to exist, it would necessitate the contradiction of non-existence for it, meaning the impossible would not be non-existent, and that would lead to it not being impossible by necessity, because non-existence is necessary among the necessities of the impossible. So if it exists, then it would lead to it not being impossible by necessity. As you say, thinking is necessary among the realities of human beings, so if the necessity of that reality was absent from him by not being a thinker, then that human being would not be a human being. So if the necessity of the impossible was absent from him, which is non-existence, then he would become existent, not non-existent, necessitating it to not be impossible, and the impossible being not impossible based on that assumption, which is the meaning of negating the essence from itself, is invalid. So, and from that, the existence of a partner to God, the blessed and exalted, for this is impossible in its essence, so it never exists. So the judgment of the impossible, that it does not accept existence at all, rather, it is necessarily non-existent. As for the possible, it has its judgments. The impossible has one judgment, which is, it does not accept existence at all. Rather, it is necessarily non-existent. As for the possible, it has its judgments. The possible in itself, as defined, is what does not necessitate its own existence or non-existence. Rather, its existence and non-existence are from something else. Like all the celestial and terrestrial creatures that you see, all of that is possible, equal in its existence and non-existence, and its existence and non-existence are not from itself, but from something else, not from its own essence, but from something else. So, what does not necessitate its own existence or non-existence is the possible. Based on this definition of the possible, the following rules have been established for it. Its need for a cause for its existence and non-existence. The possible thing, whether an animal, a plant, or an inanimate object, necessarily needs a cause for its existence if it exists, and a cause for its non-existence if it is originally non-existent, or if non-existence occurs after its existence. The evidence for this is that both the existence and non-existence of the possible are not from itself, but from something else, and that its essence does not necessarily entail one of them without the other. Sometimes its essence is existent, and sometimes it is non-existent, as previously defined. So existence and non-existence are equal for its essence in their possibility, that is, for the possible. This is very important because if the existence of the possible is not from itself, and all these things are possible in the sense that they are contingent, they came into existence after not being, and they become non-existent after existence. Then the question arises, who gave them existence? Because their existence is not from themselves, there must be someone who gave them existence. This introduction is very important in proving the existence of the great Creator. May He be glorified when debating atheists and other skeptics. Otherwise, we do not need such a thing, because God has made human nature affirm the existence of its Creator, its Maker, and its Originator. But all of this is brought up because we are responding to the atheists, materialists, fatalists, and skeptics who doubt the existence of the great Creator. And we say to them, these are the divisions of the known: impossible in itself, necessary in itself, possible in itself. And the mind cannot come up with a fourth. Then it is said to them, look at this creation in its entirety and at yourselves. You were found after you did not exist. then you become nothing after existence. So who gave you existence? And likewise, this creation. If something possible were to exist without a reason to favor its existence over its non-existence, then favoring one of the equals is necessary, and that is existence over non-existence, making it a preference without a reason. Meaning, if something possible was non-existent, and then was found, and it is said, it was found without a reason, thus it was found without a reason, then we say, you have favored one of the equals without a reason, and this is rejected by reason. If something possible were to exist without a reason to favor its existence over its non-existence, because the possible is equal in its right to existence and non-existence, so if it were to be found without a reason, then we would have favored one of the equals, which is existence, over non-existence, which is equal to it in relation to the possible. We favored it without a reason, and that is invalid, because it implies that they are not equal, and that existence is more favored than non-existence. While in the definition, we have seen that the possible is equal to existence and non-existence in itself. And you also say, if something possible were non-existent, without a reason to favor its non-existence over its existence, then favoring one of the equals is necessary, which is non-existence. We have favored it over its equals, which is existence in relation to the possible, without a reason, and this is invalid, because it implies that they, meaning existence and non-existence, are not equal, because we have favored one over the other, and they. It is impossible for one of the equals to favor the other without a reason, and here we have favored without a reason, and we said, this is it. It is non-existence without a reason. This is it. It was found without a reason. We may have favored one of the equals over the other, meaning they are not equal, even though it is possible for something to be equally existent and non-existent. Favoring one of the equals over the other without justification is invalid intellectually. It implies that non-existence is more likely than existence for the possible whose non-existence is without a cause. While we have seen in the definition of the possible that existence and non-existence are equal in relation to itself. So if something exists without a cause, or non-exists without a cause, it would necessitate favoring one of the equals, existence and non-existence, without justification, making them unequal as mentioned. This combines the opposites, equality and inequality, in one thing, and the union of opposites is invalid. Therefore, there must be a cause for the existence and non-existence of the possible. This introduction alone suffices to respond to the atheists, who claim that what you see in the creation of Allah, in this universe where you deny its creator, is not authentic in the universe. For it exists after non-existence, then turns into non-existence after existence. You see it in everything you see, in the clouds that form, then dissipate with rain, turning into water, and in other crops, animals and plants. Indeed, they themselves existed after not being present, then they inevitably become, and they cannot avoid the inevitability of transitioning to death. No human exists without acknowledging the inevitability of their transition to death. No one disputes this. Everyone knows they will surely die. So they are asked, from where? You were found after non-existence, and you will turn into non-existence after existence. So who gave you existence? It cannot be said then, this happened without a cause. Then it is said, you have contradicted yourselves, because your existence after non-existence, and your return to non-existence after existence, makes existence and non-existence equal in relation to yourselves. So if you favor one of the equals without a reason, then it means that they are not equal. Therefore, you have fallen into a logical contradiction as long as you are using your minds and denying the existence of the great Creator with these minds that Allah has blessed you with. You have made them shoes on your feet, and not utilize them for what they were created for, explaining the invalidation of favoring one of the equals without a reason, and that this was only because it implies the meeting of opposites as mentioned before. Expanding on that, for our need for it in the following judgments, so that it is sufficient to mention what was mentioned here about repeating the statement later. So the first possible judgments, the need of the possible for the reason for its existence and non-existence. The second judgment, its occurrence, the occurrence of the possible. Everything from the existing possibilities is contingent, and the meaning of the possible being contingent, that it existed after being non-existent. So the occurrence of a thing is its existence after non-existence. Because you will find this statement repeated a lot on the tongues of the scholars from our righteous predecessors, like Sheikh Raslan, Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn al-Qayyim, and others from our early scholars. You will find the word occurrence, and that these creatures are contingent, and that the occurrence happened, and so on. So the meaning of the possible being contingent, that it existed after being non-existent. So the occurrence of a thing is its existence after non-existence. So you and the book and the pen in your hand and the paper you write on and everything you see of matters, all these things are contingent because they existed after not being present. And the evidence of the occurrence of possibilities is based on an introduction that must be explained first. This introduction is that we have passed in the previous judgment the determination of the need of possibilities for the reason of their existence or non-existence. So if something possible is found, either it exists before its cause. The possible must have a reason for its existence and for its non-existence. If something possible is found before the existence of its cause, this is a possibility. Or it exists with its cause, so the cause and the possible exist together, that the possible exists after the cause. These are the mental possibilities. The possible needs a reason for its existence. As it passed, this reason may either be delayed compared to the existence of the possible, which is the cause. The reason may be delayed compared to the cause, or the cause and the cause may exist together at the same time, or the cause, which is the possible, may be delayed compared to the existence of the cause, then the cause exists first, and then the cause exists after that. The first assumption, which is the existence of the possible thing before the existence of its cause. This is invalid, because the possible needs a reason for its existence, and this assumption leads to the advancement of the needed thing, which is the possible, over the needed thing for its existence, which is the cause. And in that, it invalidates the need of the possible for the reason of its existence, as long as it existed before its cause. So it does not need it, because it existed without it. It has been passed that the possible needs the reason for its existence, because the need of the possible for the reason of its existence is necessarily fixed as past. The advancement of the possible over its cause and existence is an invalid assumption. The second assumption, which is the existence of the possible with the existence of its cause at the same time. This is also invalid. Why? Because the existence of the possible with the existence of its cause implies their equality in the rank of existence. They have existed together, meaning neither of them has an advantage over the other in their existence as long as they have existed together at the same time. And thus, the judgment that one of them is the cause of the existence of the other and an influential reason in it. It is a preference of one of the equals over the other without preference, and it is invalid as past, because they are unequal, which is a contradiction. And if the progress of the possible has been invalidated by its cause, and its comparison and existence has been invalidated, the third assumption is correct, which is the existence of the possible after the existence of its cause. Therefore, the existence precedes the existent. The creator must precede the created. This is what is meant to be achieved. Based on this introduction, the necessity of the existence of the possible after the existence of its cause, the evidence for the occurrence of the possible is established as follows. For the cause to precede the possible in existence implies that the cause alone must exist first. Because the possible can be non-existent, its cause must exist first before any other. Because it cannot be compared in existence, so the cause exists first, the cause exists, and the possible can be non-existent with no existence, then the possible exists afterwards. Caused by the cause alone exists before the possible exists. It is non-existent, meaning the existence of the possible, because the meaning of an event, as mentioned, is what exists after non-existence. So every possible event, for example, a son is non-existent when only his father exists before he is born, then when he is born. The existence of that son becomes an event, because he exists after not existing, and this is the meaning of the occurrence that is constant in every possible matter. One of the rulings of the possible, the non-need of the possible in its non-existence for an existential cause. Every possible matter has two states, a state of existence and a state of non-existence, because it is equal in its right to existence and non-existence. So every possible matter has two states, a state of existence and a state of non-existence. The existing possible must have an existential cause that brought it about, meaning there must be an existing cause that brought it about. So everything you perceive with your senses of existing beings must have an existing cause to give them existence. Because the non-existent cause cannot be a source of existence, the one lacking something, as they say, cannot give it. Therefore, the one who gave these existences their existence must necessarily be characterized by existence. Does he give it existence while he is non-existent? For the one who gave existence to existences must be described with the attribute of existence. The possible non-existent. It is not necessary for it to have a causal reason for its existence, because non-existence is negation and denial does not require creation. Rather, in the non-existence of the possible thing, the absence of a cause for its existence is enough, and in preserving its continuity, or not affecting it. An example of this: it is enough in the darkness of your room, with the absence of light in it, that there is no one to illuminate it. It is enough in the darkness of the room that there is no one to turn on the lamp, or that someone is present but does not light it. So its effect is absent in illuminating it, and the electric current that preserves its light remains. It is possible for there to be no light in the room, and it remains dark, and it is possible for there to be light, but its effect is absent. So it does not affect the removal of darkness from it. So it remains in darkness, wanting to sleep, so it exists. However, it does not dispel this darkness, and there is no light in the room. The absence of light in the room is enough to indicate the absence of anyone in it, or the absence of its effect in illuminating it, or the absence of the electric current that preserves its light. Non-existence only requires a similar non-existence. Thus, it is realized that the possible does not need a causal reason for its non-existence, but the non-causal reason is sufficient for it. In other words, the absence of its cause is enough for it, or the absence of the effect of that cause on it. So it is non-existent with the existence of the cause that could create it, but it does not affect it with existence. It is non-existent with the presence of the cause that could create it, but it does not affect this non-existence with existence, like the darkness in the room where the light is non-existent. It is non-existent in the presence of a possible cause, but it does not affect this non-existent with its presence, like darkness in a room where light is non-existent in it. You may be present in the room, but you do not affect it by lighting the lamp, even though you have the ability to do so, and there may be no one in it. Therefore, from the judgments of the possible, its lack of need for a reason for its existence. From the judgments of the possible, its need for a reason for its continuation. Just as the possible needs a reason for its beginning, it also needs a reason for its preservation. The evidence for this is that the possible does not necessitate its own existence or non-existence, and therefore, its need for a reason for its existence is essential to the reality of possibility, which cannot be separated from it in any case as long as it exists, whether in its beginning or in its continuation, because it derives its existence from another. So the continuity of the reason for its existence is necessary, as it needs a cause for its beginning of existence. This entire universe was non-existent, and Allah, the Lord of the worlds, created it. And He is the Creator. Glorified and exalted be He. So He created all these creatures out of nothing. This is a rational matter that the mind confirms. The mind confirms that the existent can come into existence from non-existence, as it has happened, but the mind does not imagine it. And as it has happened that we do not consider imagination when reasoning, we often rationalize things without being able to imagine them. It was non-existent, so Allah created it then. The reason for its existence that gave it existence is Allah, and it is in need, meaning this existence, of someone to sustain it as long as it remains in existence, because its existence is not from itself. This is a response to the philosophers who mention some of their sayings, that Allah created this creation, then left it, and was preoccupied with the idealism. So they establish a creator who created the creation, then neglected it. It is said, no, because the existence of this existent that was non-existent derives its existence from the one who originated it, from the one who began its creation, and it is in need of it for the continuation of its existence. So Allah is the living, the everlasting, and He is the one who gave existence its existence, so He is the Creator, and He is the Maker who created all this creation and perfected it. So He is the originator of the heavens and the earth. He created the whole universe, and He created all these creatures from above and below, not on a previous example, but Allah, the Lord of the worlds, created them and showed them out of nowhere. They need His almighty presence at the beginning of their existence, because it was from Him that they were created, and then they need His almighty presence in the continuation of their existence, because their existence is from Him. What is the truth of the reason? What is the difference between cause, condition, and preparer? The meaning of the true cause, which we have proved the need for the possible in its previous judgments. It is the origin of existence and the giver of existence. They may express it by the existing one, or by the existing vowel, or by the active vowel, or by the real participle, or other sentences whose formulas differ, and their meanings do not differ. The reason may sometimes be metaphorically called the condition or the prepared, and it depends on the existence of the possible, the condition or the prepared. Although there is a difference between these three in fact. Now we have three terms: cause, condition, and preparer. Before we explain the comparison between the real cause on the one hand, the condition, and the preparer on the other, we give each of the latter two, for the condition and for the preparer, his example, and mention his judgment, so that the difference between him and others becomes clear. An example of a condition is, building in the construction of a house. Construction does not give existence to the house that it builds, as it does not create the materials for its construction, but according to what God has deposited in the universe from the age of a condition in the construction of a house, a sine qua non condition in the construction of a house. With the image that he draws in his mind of that house, and the special movements that are being made in its construction, it is a condition for the existence of this house. The condition is necessary in the existence of the conditional, but it is not necessary for its existence. Like the construction, it is a condition for the existence of the builder, but he builds the house and then dies, and the house remains after him, perhaps centuries. He does not need the existence of a condition, but he created it and then died. As for the preparer, for example the first step, it prepares and prepares for the existence of the second step, so that there can be a second step from B to C only if it is preceded by a first step from A to B. And in this regard, it is called a preparer, because it prepares for the next step. If, for example, we impose 3 points, A, B, and C. The step from B to C must be subsequent to the step from A to B. So the first step from A to B is prepared for the next step from B to C. In this regard, it is called prepared. If a possible thing depends in its existence on the existence of the condition only, then it depends on the existence of the preparation, then it depends on whether it does not exist. The preparation exists, then it is executed, means it vanishes. The second step depends on the existence of the first step first, and then on the completion and non-existence of that first step. The walker should start in the second step. Otherwise, that second step would not have existed. It does not exist until after the annihilation of the first. But if he remains in the first step, he cannot enter the second step. The first step, the one that is prepared for the second step, must pass and end. This is the difference between a condition and a preparer. As for the difference between the condition and the preparer on the one hand, and the real cause on the other, the real reason is the one that precedes the possible by existing, and then gives it to it, and that possible benefits its existence from its cause, and that meaning is not realized in the condition. Because, for example, the construction is not the one that created the building materials, and it is also not realized in the preparation. Because the first step is not the one that created the second step, but others created them together. And because, if the first step were the reason for the existence of the second step, if something depends in its existence on the condition or preparation, it benefits existence from its cause. Existence derives from the cause. There is a difference between stopping something over others and benefiting from existence from it. In reason, the thing benefits existence from others, derives existence from others. As for the condition, as for the preparer, the thing depends on its existence, but it does not derive existence from it. That's a difference. The second difference is that the possible does not dispense with the reason for its survival in any case, and that meaning is not realized in the condition. The house dispenses with the construction in its survival, as the construction dies and the construction remains there. This is also not achieved in the preparation. Rather, the second step does not dispense with the first step only in its survival. It is achieved only if that first step does not exist. With regard to the way in which the cause is given on the condition and prepared at all in some way with these differences, it is because they are similar to the reason why something stopped on them, and they preceded it in existence. Because you will find an overlap between these releases among many scholars who have been exposed to the dahiri, to philosophers, to the region, and to other of these stray categories and unbridled whims. In this introduction, we have now gone through the definition of the 3 sections of knowledge, namely, the impossible, the duty, and the possible, and the statement of the ruling of each of these sections. And God is helping. May Allah's peace and blessings be upon our Prophet Muhammad, and upon his family and companions.